to Convos with the Candidates. I'm your host Amanda, and we are excited to have candidate Henry Klein joining us this evening. Shirley's Kitchen Cabinet is an organization dedicated to amplifying the voices and power of Black women through education and advocacy so they can be effective advocates for the issues that matter to them and their communities. We will first start with questions from me and then open it up to questions from the audience and Facebook Live. If you are a Kansas City voter, hit the love button. And if you have a question, post it in comments. If your question doesn't get answered today, the candidates and their campaigns are encouraged to comment on their live feed after our interview. Before we begin, we want to thank Jennifer, owner of Plush Life,
Yay.
who we salon for hosting today's conversation. So all right, let's get into it. Hi Henry.
Hey, good
Thanks for
afternoon.
joining us.
Yeah.
Could you just please start by introducing yourself and tell us why you're running for mayor?
Yeah. So, my name's Henry Klein, and I'm the branch manager for Bank of America at 63rd and Prospect. And I've been managing that branch for about 2.5 years now, and little did I know how much I was absolutely going to love being at that branch. I have adopted a community, and I think they've adopted me. And every day is really a great experience, and every day is another opportunity to help people. You'd be surprised how many folks don't have bank accounts, and so we get the opportunity to help. We get the opportunity to show them how to manage their funds better, which is a really important thing for them. But what's funny about it is at the end of the day, I get all these thank yous. I'm getting people thanking me for opening up a bank account for them, or helping them out with something, or showing them how to use the mobile app or something. So, you know, that's what I do for a living. And of course, you've heard that old adage about if you love what you do, you'll never work a day in your life. Okay, so that's a lot of what that's about. But also, here in Kansas City, I have been board president for Habitat for Humanity. So we build houses in this community. I'm an animal lover, so I was the vice president of the board of the Humane Society of Greater Kansas City. Court-appointed special advocate. I work evenings once a week on evenings with people with special needs, help feed the homeless. So a little bit of my campaign, and maybe a tagline which we haven't really used, but could be a volunteer's heart with a business person's acumen. You know, it's kind of that combination where those two can really meet and do some real good. You know, so that's a little bit about me. I've been living here for over 30 years, and so the struggle I have, and the reason I got in this race is some of the problems that I've tried to hone in on are problems that we have seen here. I've been living here for over 30 years, and they're still here, and they're still with us, and they're probably even worse than before. So what would those two problems be? One, crime and safety issues in the city. You know, again, I'm at more waking hours at 63rd Prospect than I do anything else, of course, that's where I work. And we can have problems just getting the police to respond. It can be, I had a gentleman at the branch, and he wasn't necessarily a complete danger to anybody else, at least not at that moment, but he was on drugs, and we had to call the police. I was on hold for over 5 minutes, and I still never got the police. When I do, sometimes it can take 30 or 40 minutes, and by the way, that's at a bank. I can tell you anecdotal stories, I mean, I don't have any statistics, that people in the community are waiting even longer than that. That's the safety issues that we have still had a problem with here in Kansas City. And the second thing is education. We're still struggling with education. So, would you like me to talk about a couple of the solution types of things?
If we have time later, because we're actually going to get into some of those questions.
Okay, great. Let's do that, and I'll kind of walk through what I think are some of the solutions to it. Okay, but so those two issues are the primary things of my campaign and reason why.
Great, and I just have a follow-up question.
Please.
Because for the reason that we're actually here tonight, so I just would like to know, what do you expect to accomplish on behalf of Black women voters? Okay,
so at my branch, over 95% of my customers are Black. And so for Black women, what I feel like is that ability, but it's probably true for all women, is that ability to empower them to take possession and hold of their finances and their financial strength to be able to do the things that they need to do. And that translates, ultimately, I think you could even translate it ultimately is what a mayor would want to be able to do. And that is helping everybody, and Black women in particular, help them succeed and excel in our 21st century economy. So that's kind of a general answer, but we'll get into some specifics. Okay? Yeah.
And then can you just share with us what your vision is for Kansas City?
A much safer and much more highly educated Kansas City. It is too, particularly when I think of 63rd Street, it is too hard. Life is too hard for too many of my customers in 63rd Prospect. I see the struggles that they have day in and day out. And look, if we can do things like better safety, where people feel like they can trust the police to respond to them in a fast and appropriate amount of time, if we can help this next generation truly get jobs that they couldn't get before, that vision, if we do those things well, I promise you all the other things, you want to talk about potholes, that's not my favorite thing to talk about, but guess what? They would get done more quickly, because if we do the things I'm talking about right, more people are going to want to come up here. That instead of having to raise taxes, we expand the tax base, and all of a sudden we can do all sorts of other things. But in a city that's not safe enough, and in a city where folks cannot get their kids cannot get the kind of education they need, I want to tell you one quick story about this, because it's really important. I was board president for Habitat for Humanity, so we would decide as a board who was going to get a home. And a lot of times in the back of my mind, and I never said it to the board because I didn't want to be the person to sort of bring all this down, but I'd have to ask myself, are we doing this family a favor or not? Because Habitat KC at the time could only build from Kansas City south of the river to the southern border of Kansas City, Missouri. And I wondered, were we really doing this family a favor when they were getting a great house, but they were potentially in this neighborhood that wasn't as safe as it needed to be, and kids weren't getting the kind of education that they needed to thrive in a 21st century economy. And I really thought about that long and hard. Fix these two things, and so many other things happen after that.
And so then what we would like to know too is I have two questions for you before we start to talk more about community.
Okay, good.
So what are the three biggest issues facing Kansas City, and how do you plan to tackle these issues in the first 90 days of office?
Okay, so first 90 days you want to set the agenda. That doesn't mean you're going to have accomplished your goal, obviously. If anybody could have solved these problems in 90 days, they'd already done it, okay? But so you know, you've asked for three, but let me start with two, and then we'll kind of weave into a third.
Okay.
All right, so obviously I'm talking about safety. We need to have local control of the police department here in Kansas City, because our priorities need to be the police department's priorities. Priorities related to getting to scenes a whole lot faster than that. If we want to be the sanctuary city that we aspire to be, we cannot have Jeff City and the politicians of Jeff City controlling what we want to do here in Kansas City. So for your viewers, let me explain to you how the police board works right now.
Okay.
There are 5 members on the board. The mayor is always one of those members, but the other 4 are appointed by the governor. Well, look, I'm just going to divulge some of my politics. My politics are clearly not the governor's politics, and what's furthermore is I doubt for most, not all, but for most people in Kansas City, they probably don't tend to go that way either. So when somebody says, well, if you take back local control, you're going to have the politics of Kansas City. Well, what we're really trading is, if you even want to call it politics, the politics of Jeff City for the politics of Kansas City. Well, now we say what we want to be prioritized, and again, say, even community policing, for instance, is a big buzzword. Every single other person that's going to come on this show with y'all is going to talk about something like that, and they're never going to be able to do it because they don't have local control. Look, I work in this neighborhood, and when I have neighborhood leaders come to me and tell me that they can't get the police to come to their neighborhood meetings. That's because they don't have to, the police department doesn't have to report to us locally here. So sometimes the police, you'll hear instances where sometimes that happens, sometimes it's not. It's all a one-off kind of a situation. We need to change that so we can have the kind of community policing where we can build trust in the community. We need to have rapid response so we can build trust in the community. You and I need to be able to pick up the phone and call and understand that we're going to get helped very quickly. All right, secondly, education. I want to talk real quickly on that, and I promise we'll move on. So education. I want to have a City Hall Office of Education. It's going to be designed to work with all of the K through 12 schools here in Kansas City, and all of the 15 school districts, but it also needs to work with vocational schools, community colleges, 4-year schools, to understand the needs of each one of those. Because the needs of Kansas City, Missouri school district are going to be somewhat different than, say, the needs of a different school, or Hickman Mills, or something like that. We need to understand them, but then the other thing of it is so that we can get started and really understand what this office could do, do, I propose that we bring something like the LeBron James I Promise School to Kansas City. All right, so what is that? That is a public school. Actually, LeBron formed this in conjunction with the public school system. So I'm not talking about a charter, and I'm not talking about a private school. This is a public school where it takes care of at-risk kids and really deals with the issues that they face. It takes care of their hunger issues or some of the emotional issues that they may face. It helps the parents get jobs. It helps deal with hunger issues. I mean, it is a comprehensive approach, not unlike something like an Operation Breakthrough. By the way, I was on the advisory board for Operation Breakthrough too. Sorry, all right, so the conclusion that is, we need to be innovative and excited about how we go about helping education here in Kansas City.
All right, great. So we're just going to kind of
All right.
speed along a little bit.
Yeah, brevity is not one of my fortes.
It's all right. We're going to get there. We're going to get through it. Okay, so this is a 3-part question.
Okay.
And we're going to begin by just talking about community, all right?
Okay, good.
So how do you plan to preserve communities east of Troost in a climate that supports developers and dollars? And what must the city do to continue economic development? And third, should the city use tax incremental financing, which we all know as TIF, differently? And if so, what do you propose?
All right, so go back and read to me the first question.
Absolutely. So how do you plan to preserve communities east of Troost?
All right, so I work
With
at
developer dollars, yes.
I work at 63rd Prospect, so I'm in the middle of east of Troost, if you will.
Okay.
So, I was board, again, if I can go back to my board president of Habitat for Humanity, one of the things that we really wanted to do is take various blocks and kind of understand what is the nature of those blocks. For instance, are there some vacant lots? Are there some houses that are abandoned? Are there other homes where people need help maybe rebuilding or refurbishing and repairing their homes? And what we really wanted to do at Habitat, almost on a block-by-block basis, is understand that and start to, if you will, infill. Put affordable housing in those vacant lots, because vacant lots create all sorts of problem situations when they're not filled. So do vacant houses. We want to rehab those houses and put them back on the market. And at the same time, we want to help other homeowners. And at one time, we even talked to Emmanuel Cleaver. He had his Green's Impact Zone project going on. Ultimately, he didn't get the funds for that. But if we could have, what you're talking about now is helping what we call public-private nonprofit partnerships. All right, so the public is potentially the city. Private is the donors that can come from the private sector, and of course the nonprofit. In this example, we Habitat. All right, so we need to start. And by the way, I've heard estimates that there are 5,000 homes needed for low-income housing here in Kansas City. That's the beginnings of what we need to meet the demand. That kind of idea, Habitat can be one partner, but there can be other partners as well. Now, that's kind of a nice deep dive into what I think was the other part of the 3 questions, and that is tax increment financing and what do we do for economic development. So, particularly with the larger developments, from here on out, and it really should have been done in much greater force a long time ago, we're going to say, hey, if you want a TIF, particularly over 50%, and then for all the folks listening about tax increment financing, that's giving them tax abatement for a certain number of years. A lot of these things can run between 10 and 25 years where they're getting tax abatement, which is basically used to help them offset some of their construction costs, etc. So if you're going to get a TIF, particularly over 50%, you're going to have to contribute something back to the community. The trick is going to be for us, the city, and all the stakeholders to have some of these projects, so to speak, and everybody uses the term shovel ready, but really ready, so that we can say, okay, builder, if you want to do this and you're asking for something from us, you've got to give back to the community, and here are the projects we want you to consider doing. If you want to do something else, that's fine, but I will confess to you, there's another candidate who talks about, hey, sometimes we can wind up getting money back from these developers, but only for the kinds of projects that they want to do. Well, we've got to take that conversation and turn it in very, very different terms and say, hey, you're going to have to do things based on what we want you to do. Finally, there's been an interesting idea that's been floated that apparently they do in Kansas, and that is that the school districts can veto these TIF projects. I would be very, very interested in understanding how we can implement this here in Kansas City. We cannot let look at Hickman Mills and how it's struggling. We cannot allow that to go on anymore.
All right, so we're just
going to moving on. I'm sorry. Yep.
No, it's okay. We're just going to keep it going. So this is kind of the common theme that keeps coming up in the mayoral debate. is the eradication of violence, and really we'd like to talk about just how can we lower violence in Kansas City. So the common thread, like I discussed earlier, has been crime. How will you collectively work alongside city council members, city departments, and community organizations to develop effective solutions to our crime issues?
Okay, so I'm gonna sound like that broken record or that dog that's biting at your ankle and won't let go. All right, we have got to have an office of education at City Hall. Now, by doing that, part of its charge will be to work with various different stakeholders, including internally at City Hall. And so what I'm suggesting is once we do that, then we can try to understand what are the needs of the Kansas City, Missouri Public School District, what are the needs of the different districts. Because an education and a job for somebody takes away some of the other possibilities of what could happen otherwise. Sometimes I think that we have crime issues in our community, as I see it at 63rd and Prospect, because it's a function of hopelessness. It's a function of nothing else has seemed to work. Whether you're a young kid who all of a sudden falls behind on your education, and all of a sudden you're frustrated, and you're trapped in this situation, and now you're looking for some way to feel, have some self-respect and self-worth, and unfortunately, that takes a really bad turn and a bad bounce into a situation that you wouldn't want your kids to be in. I'm suggesting to you that there's no short-term fix. That we've got to, once again, we've got to have local control of the police department so we can do the things that we want to be able to do. And that's a very short-term discussion. It doesn't fix the longer intrinsic problems of education. I'm absolutely going to pound, in this case, my kneecaps here to say, hey, we have got to do these things right. And I don't really want to be in Kansas City that doesn't understand this and doesn't want to do this as well as it needs to, because there's just too many folks that we're leaving behind.
All right. Thank you. Well, it looks like we have a question from one of our Facebook Live participants, Sister Stacy. Hey, sis.
Hey,
How's it going? She would like to know, what are your thoughts about public schools versus charter schools in Kansas City?
That's a really, really good question. All right, so let's talk about for a moment the notion of why charter schools came here in the first place. Charter schools came here because at some point it was decided that the parents and kids need to have an alternative to the public school system without necessarily having to go and pay for it out of pocket at a private school. You've always had the private school option, okay? So, but the unfortunate thing is that charter schools take money away from the public school systems, all right? That's by definition what I just said, that's exactly what starts to happen, all right? So, there are some charter schools here that I think are doing some excellent work. So we're going to keep that going, and I want to be an advocate for that. University Academy might be one good example of that, for instance. But I am really struggling with this notion of taking away public funds and putting them in a charter school. That's why when I talked about the LeBron I Promise school, that was a public school he formed. To think about what LeBron was doing here, he was really giving this a maximum amount of thought to say, hey, I don't want to build this and make it part of a charter school that's taken away from the public school system. I want to strengthen the public school system. I went to public schools. I graduated from a public high school. I went to college based on that education. That's my dream for every kid here in Kansas City.
All right, so we just have one more quick question before we wrap this up for you.
You're not telling me we're already done.
Yeah, we've already blown through this interview.
Oh gosh, that's painful.
I know, it goes by fast.
Right?
All right,
okay.
let's do it. We'd like to really talk about. We have a little bit of time, I've been told.
Oh, okay.
Okay, we're live, so things happen. So we can actually dig a little bit deeper into this.
Go for it.
No worries.
That's good.
So we started talking about education, and we can just kind of keep going around that. So there's quality education is another hot issue, right? So we just talked about charter schools versus public schools.
We did.
We know that a pre-K sales tax is on a ballot.
Yeah.
Are you in support of the pre-K tax? Why and why not? And then the second part of this is, if you are not, please tell us what you propose instead.
Okay, so no, I'm not going to be in support of the pre-K tax. Now here's why. I have always struggled with the taxes we have here in Kansas City that are regressive. Let me explain what I mean by that, just so everybody understands. A regressive tax is one that taxes everybody at the same rate. So for instance, a sales tax, if you go buy something over at Costco or wherever, okay, and you pay for something, you're going to pay the same percent. You, I, all of us going to say pay the same percent. And yet, one of us may be making a whole lot more than the other, but yet we're paying the same percent. That's the definition of a regressive sales tax. By the way, the 1% earnings tax is a regressive sales tax. Now, I don't want any of you to worry. I'm not proposing anything about getting rid of the 1%, but I'm deeply not in favor of regressive taxes. And I will tell you that under my administration, we're done with sales tax increases. That is not the right way to finance things. And on the 1% tax, I would love to see a carve out for anybody at or below 130% of poverty. Okay, in other words, we need to start, people who need those funds just to help get their families by do not need to be taxed by that. So I'm not in favor of it, but here's the second reason why I'm not in favor of pre-K. And I'm sure there'll be interesting counter-arguments to this, but here's my concern. What school are we going to therefore be sending these kids to, okay? I think we need to have a great build already that has occurred. In other words, whether we attach it to the Kansas City, Missouri public school system in this area or wherever, I want to make sure that the product, and it sounds like a business person, but I want to make sure that the product that our parents are going to be able to send their kids to for pre-K is an outstanding product. And right now, I'm afraid and it sounds great that a parent can choose wherever they want their kid to go within some boundaries, but I'm really deeply worried that they won't get the quality pre-K that I want to see them get. So between the regressive nature of it and the product issue, if you will, I'm not in favor of it. So what am I in favor of? Absolutely, pre-K is a no-brainer. We need to do pre-K. And by the way, I won't be waiting until the 8th year of my administration to try to push something like that through. Okay, yes, that's a little bit of a dig, but not a hard stick like that. Just a little one. But my point is that Barack Obama talked about the importance of now. You talk about my first 90 days. There are going to be 4 or 5 initiatives that we are going to hammer home and we're going to run at, which is not to say we're going to accomplish those, but there's going to be a clear understanding of how we're going to get from start to finish with several of those things. And pre-K is on that agenda. Okay? If this thing does not pass, there is still a momentum here that we've got to take on, and pre-K is just an absolute no-brainer. We've got to.
Thank you for answering that.
Yeah,
so housing is another issue here in Kansas City. We're really dealing with that, and data shows that stable employment and housing are important to a child's well-being, being able to get quality education as we continue to kind of go through that as well. What are the direct actions you will take to deal with the skyrocketing housing prices and issues?
Right. All right. So first off let's talk about something let's talk about a living wage. So in a living wage, we need to be paying at least $15 an hour, and where we can encourage businesses to offer the kind of benefits that a family needs. I want to try to encourage that at the same time, but definitely at least $15 an hour, because you can't live off anything less than that, and I would tell you that that's probably going to struggle with that. So that's the first piece of it. But the second part of it is this. We are in a low unemployment environment. There are lots of people, again, think about 63rd and Prospect, who want a job, but maybe they don't always have the qualifications that is necessary. So what we've got to tackle is not how to get the jobs. The jobs are there, and the jobs are likely in an aging economy. They're likely to actually be more. You could see unemployment go down even more. But we've got to make sure that everybody, including the community that I get to serve and feel so strongly about, has the kind of skill set so that they can get those jobs and they can thrive. When we do some of those kind of things really, really well, then all of a sudden you're going to see some of the other things start to happen as well that we need to take care of.
Okay, great. And it looks like you just answered one of our other followers, listeners out there. Hey, Sister Shirley, what's going on, sis?
Hey, sis.
About the high-priced housing on the east side here in Kansas City.
Right. So again, I talked a little bit about the habitat model. That model is designed to make sure that people who need low and affordable housing get it. Let me give you an example of what I'm saying. At Habitat, we offered 0% interest rate loans. And I cannot remember a time when the cost of rent, in other words, when the person was buying one of our homes, their cost of rent was higher Then home ownership, I'm talking about with insurance and with taxes. Now, what happens when somebody buys a home? All of a sudden, they're part of a community. All of a sudden, a community can change from a renter kind of a situation to a homeowner kind of a situation. And doesn't it ingrain you more in the community when you own something versus when you rent something? So to me, we've got to follow those kind of models where we're intentionally trying to build and construct and put out the kinds of housing that's intentionally meant to be affordable types of housing.
Okay, great, thank you.
Yeah.
So we want to really talk about a little bit about Black women in leadership.
Okay.
And so, do you have any Black women on your campaign in senior staff positions? And what will you do to ensure that Black women have a place at the decision-making table in your administration?
Okay, so let's start with the first question. And
Yes.
the answer is yes, I do.
Okay.
All right, so as a matter of fact, now look, there's just a few of us. Some people do it on a volunteer basis. There's one person that on a very stipend-like basis is paid. Here's the thing I do before I answer your question I want to get through. There's a wonderful opportunity here in Kansas City with my campaign. We're probably the least funded campaign of all of the campaigns. Wouldn't it be an amazing thing if a campaign that's trying to do the things that we're trying to do actually won? You know, one of the things I said to the Kansas City Star, wouldn't it be an amazing day if we could get money out of this race, or out of any race? Because what happens with money is, and if you think, well, all these other candidates are raising hundreds of thousands of dollars, what does that mean? Do you think that money came for free? In other words, trust me, the promises and the commitments that were behind that money will help gravitate our city policy in ways that unfortunately, in many cases, aren't necessarily the best places for us to go. So we could set the stage here in Kansas City for something that hasn't been seen here in probably decades, and perhaps even on a national basis. If my campaign breaks through, and we're one of the top two, I promise you there's a story in there that will absolutely go citywide and will probably go national in terms of a candidate who went to the grassroots, talked about the kind of issues that are the basic core kind of issues, did it with some gusto and some real sincerity, and said, this is where we've got to go with that. So now let's get back to the question at hand. Okay, fair enough. So remember,
All right, Henry, we only got 3 minutes.
3
so
minutes.
I just want to know if you
okay.
could just help us with how do you have, like, Black women have a place at the decision-making table in your administration? So real quick, how do you...
Okay, well, all right, so the first off is, what's the intent? The intent is absolutely yes, okay? All right, now, I can tell you from working in the community that I work in, and don't think I don't think about this, there's all sorts of people that I meet on a daily basis. Remember, 95% of my clientele, my customer base is African American, is Black. And I love my customers, and they have been so wonderful to me. I meet some incredible Black women, day in and day out. I mean, that's all what my day is, okay? I mean, granted, it's Black men too, but I mean, I probably see more women in my day than I see men in my day. Don't think I haven't thought about some of the women that I meet in terms of how would that person fit into a client administration, because I take this very, very seriously. And I want to, you know, it's just like when we hire for the branch. I want to hire from the community because they understand the community struggles way better than I do, even though now I get to be part of this community, but absolutely way better. So again, understand the intent. The intent is an emphatic yes. And then we go from there.
All right, well, great. Thanks so much, Henry, for coming
All right.
out and doing this with us.
I appreciate it. The pleasure was all mine. Thank you very much.
All right, and we'll
Wrap it up.
we're gonna wrap
Okay,
this up.
thanks everybody.
Yeah.